Discover the inspiring moment when a school bully confronts an amazing truth in just 10 seconds. Jake's shadow loomed larger than life across the hardwood floor of the gymnasium. The walls celebrated glory with banners that echoed a familial legacy, each trophy glistening like the expectations placed upon him. As the football team's star wide receiver, he commanded respect. But beneath that facade lay the dull ache of anguish. Every shove he delivered to smaller kids felt like a weight pressing down on him, like the jersey he wore, heavy with his father's ambition. His friends laughed, but the echo felt hollow, screaming questions he couldn't articulate. What was he after? A fleeting glory that would never fill his emptiness. As he leaned against the lockers, a familiar sense of dread unfurled in his gut. The upcoming science fair was low-hanging fruit for mockery, and Jake reveled in the laughter. He fixed his sights on Emily, the quiet girl with a frayed backpack who blended into the background. The absurdity of her situation struck him, a genius trapped in a life that stifled her potential while he thrived on torment. The whispers about her project reached his ears. A complex physics theory wrapped around a family legacy, a narrative that reframed who she was meant to be. Discover the inspiring moment, the announcement crackled through the speaker, drawing Jake's attention to Emily, who now stood at the front of the gym, terrified. She was going first. He could see her trembling. For a moment he thought of her life, the worn shoes, the poor lunch. His heart twisted with something he hardly recognized. She was about to present, and all he could think was how easy it would be to disrupt her. Before he could snicker, he overheard two classmates dissecting Emily's project. The science project revealed a poignant family history. Her dad, a scientist whose brilliance was overshadowed by betrayal. Jake missed the irony at first, struggling to reconcile this empathy that flickered like a candle against the harshness of his psyche. What did it mean if her story shared a family legacy with his? The walls of legacy felt like they were collapsing, revealing truths he had buried beneath layers of bravado and dominance. As Emily's name finally resonated in the gym, Jake's pulse quickened. His mind raced with conflicted thoughts. Should he stand by, smile with a cruel delight, or could he risk everything and break the pattern of his own behavior? Compassion gripped him, but it was stifled by the pressure to conform to the bullying mantle passed down from his father. He hesitated. Every second in that moment felt like an eternity, a moment that would either crown him the king of fear or perhaps something entirely unexpected. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The anticipation soared as Jake felt the heat of everyone's gaze drifting between Emily and him. In the crucial 10 seconds before she took the stage, everything spiraled within him. He locked eyes with her, and the vulnerability reflected back pierced through his tough exterior. The challenge was palpable, leaving him paralyzed. Would he step forward for her pain or retreat to the safety of his toxic crown? The air thickened, carrying the weight of their futures. His could be a step towards redemption, hers a dream waiting to be poured out and nurtured. The internal battle raged, leaving everyone breathless and Jake pinned on the edge of a decision that could unravel everything he believed. Time seemed to warp as Jake weighed his options. The laughter of his so-called friends rang in his ears, a reminder of the superficial alliance that had grown around him like a prison. With Emily poised to reveal her project, something awakened within him, a longing to fill the void he had been avoiding for so long. He took a deep breath, momentarily silencing the mocking chorus. Emily's voice quivered when she finally began speaking, Each word carried the weight of ambition, a testament to struggles he could barely fathom. Her project was intricate, yet personal, demonstrating principles of physics intertwined with her father's legacy. Jake's heart clenched as he listened, caught off guard by the story unfolding. Here was someone crafting a narrative framed not by cruelty, but by resilience. His gaze drifted to Emily's hands, which trembled ever so slightly. He recognized that fear all too well. With each detail she shared, it became clear how this was not just a project for her. It was a part of her identity, her family's history, all woven into mathematical formulas and diagrams. He clenched his fists, battling the urge to snicker, to destroy on impulse. But a voice within whispered different words, a voice challenging his very identity. The auditorium went silent, every eye locked onto her, waiting, expecting a hitch, a blunder. Jake felt a surge of something he hadn't anticipated. Would he let her down, or could he use this moment to unearth something greater within himself? In that instant, the crowd felt like a living entity, pressing on him, forcing him to make a choice. The internal turmoil sharpened, revealing the stark contrast between the life expected of him and the life he yearned to understand. "I've seen a lot of people try to shatter dreams," he thought. Suddenly he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of that destruction anymore. A flicker of rebellion surged through him, urging him forward. He could rise above the expectations that had bordered him in darkness. Every moment of pain he had caused settled into the pit of his stomach, no longer just a spark for amusement, but a heavy truth that felt undeniable. But as quickly as it surged, the fear of rejection throbbed in his mind. The battle was on. He was tired of being the bully cast in a mold created by others' suggestions. Emily's moment could also become his, a chance to reclaim his narrative. He shifted his weight, contemplating standing up, confronting his own demons. But doubt clouded his judgment. He felt a chilling pull back to his role, one that came with accolades, yet devoid of authenticity. Was it reasonable to risk everything? What if he stepped up and fell? The familiar pressure suffocated him. Jake closed his eyes, searching deep within himself for clarity amid the chaos. Then in that moment, suspended in time, he made his decision. He couldn't predict every outcome, but something inside him yearned to challenge the status quo. Could he be brave enough to break the chains that bound him to this unkind identity? "I'm not this," he thought fiercely. The sound of Emily's voice faded, drowned by the thudding heartbeat of his own resolve. He would take a step, perhaps more, into the unknown, a path that might lead him to become the person he longed to be. As he caught Emily's gaze once more, something shifted within him, a promise of growth, a hint of courage that started to blossom. With each second he hesitated, he felt the choice slipping. But would he grasp it, or let the darkness reclaim him? The decision hung heavy in the air, the stakes higher than ever. The moment of truth lay just ahead, waiting for him to unveil a different version of himself. But as the tension thickened, Jake realized he was not just battling for Emily's moment, he was fighting for his own. What would happen next? Would he risk everything and alter the trajectory of his life, or would he remain shackled to the past? The weight of possibility sat heavily on his shoulders, drawing him toward the brink of transformation. The realization dawned. The time had come to face not just Emily's story, but the very essence of his own. As the last breath of Emily's presentation hung in the air, Jake stood immobilized, a paradox of motion and inertia. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, drowning out the lingering applause that erupted around him. It echoed like a mocking reminder of the laughter that consumed him, laughter he had wielded as a shield, but now felt like a curse. The decision was still fresh, pulsing with energy, yet punctuated by the fear of exposure. He knew he could either remain in the shadows of his past or step into the glaring light of authenticity. Each beat filled him with both excitement and trepidation. What if he faltered? What if he unleashed a storm he couldn't control? In that moment of stasis, he saw flashes of his life. Each face he'd mocked, each chuckle at someone else's expense, even the sharp burst of laughter he conjured to retain favor among friends. The realization felt like ice. The thrill he once derived from belittling others had shifted to an unbearable weight. Could he bear to witness the hurt he had inflicted? The more he dwelled on it, the more he ached for a different path. Slowly, his gaze drifted back to Emily, her face a blend of vulnerability and triumph. She had bared her soul, challenging her fears head-on in front of an audience, while he sat embedded in his safety net, paralyzed. Would he continue to envelope himself in cynicism or break free, stepping away from his role as a spectator in his own life? He swallowed hard. His throat was tight. Rising from the seat felt monumental, an act that demanded every ounce of strength he could muster. But deep inside, he felt a nascent courage bubble. An undeniable urge to connect swelled within him as he envisioned doing what felt utterly revolutionary, standing up for someone else, for Emily, but also for himself. The auditorium buzzed with a sense of community he had always resisted. Would he participate, or would he pretend once more that he was invulnerable? In the depths of his mind, as the debate raged on, a single phrase crystallized: "Step into the truth." This newfound mantra fortified his resolve. With trembling legs and a flush creeping up his neck, he stood, the seat scraping against the floor, the sound resonating like thunder in his own ears. The murmuring audience quieted, turning their attention toward the boy who had lived in the shadows of ridicule far too long. Everyone," he began, his voice wavering. It felt impossibly small, yet it echoed with undeniable honesty. The pressure of unyielding gazes bore down on him, and he inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the moment. "I just wanted to say something." He glanced at Emily, who blinked in surprise, her eyes wide. "Your project, it was incredible, Emily. I didn't see it before. I wanted to laugh, to—" Words caught in his throat, a raw knot of emotion threatening to spill over. Vulnerability flowed into conviction as he continued, "But I see the strength in you now. You've made something beautiful out of a hard story. I admire that." The audience was silent, shock rippling through the seats. Had he just said that? The disbelief hung palpably in the air, as if the weight of the moment was suffocating him. A tremor of anxiety shot through him. Would they believe him? But he pressed on. "I know I've been not the person anyone wants to be around. I've enjoyed too much hurting others, laughing at their failures and weaknesses, but I'm tired of that." As he spoke, there was a strange sensation of ungarbing his heavy past, shedding it like a cumbersome coat. He could see changes forming in the eyes of the people around him, a mixture of confusion and curiosity, intermingling with dawning understanding. Jake felt the weight shifting, aware that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the very pulse of human connection. Would this be a turning point, not just for him, but for his peers? He could almost feel a ripple effect blossoming among the crowd, seeds of change emerging from his truth. Determined, Jake finished with, "I want to grow from this moment, to support others, just like you've taught me. Can I be part of that?" The applause erupted almost immediately, a tide of appreciation washing over him, but it felt entirely different now, genuine, uplifting. He had ignited a spark within himself, a willingness to abandon the status quo and carve a new chapter. But as the applause resounded around him, another realization crept in. This was just the beginning. What lay ahead could be far more challenging than the courage he summoned today. Could he carry this newfound identity forward? Would he face the peers who had once been allies, now doubting his sincerity? The lingering question loomed. How would he handle the consequences of this courageous act? The reality of his transformation was before him, But the path was rife with uncertainty, ready to test the very essence of his commitment to change. Jake stepped down from the stage, his legs still trembling from the weight of his confession. The applause felt like a veil, obscuring his fear while simultaneously heightening his awareness of what lay before him. He could feel the gazes of his peers, a mix of admiration, bewilderment, and skepticism, lingering on him, as if waiting for him to rupture under the pressure of his own declarations. He glanced at Emily, who stood at the front, her face alight with a hesitant smile. She offered him a tiny nod, and in that moment he grasped something profound. Vulnerability could forge connections, something he had never allowed himself to recognize before. But was this newfound clarity strong enough to hold up against the whispers of self-doubt that had taunted him for so long? His mind flickered to the conversations that would follow, the inevitable inquiries about his authenticity. Would people truly believe he wanted to change, or would they dismiss it as another fleeting impulse? Each echo of laughter and ridicule from his past felt like a ghost stirring within him, urging him back to familiar shadows where he would simply be another bystander. As he walked through the auditorium's dimly lit corridor, he could sense the tentative attempts of classmates to engage with him. Some wore expressions of disbelief, eyebrows raised as if processing a glitch in their understanding of who he was. Others simply avoided eye contact, perhaps unsure how to navigate this new version of Jake. Jake's heart raced when he confronted Mia and Tom, two of his closest friends who had shared in the jokes and jabs he had tossed around like candy. Their faces shifted from confusion to contemplation, and he could feel an electric charge in the air vibrating between them. "Did you really mean all that?" Mia finally asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've always been different." He hesitated, wrestling with how to respond. "Yeah, I mean it," he replied, feeling the weight of his honesty pulling him to stand firm. "I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to learn, to grow." Tom scoffed slightly, but then his expression softened. "Coming from someone like you, that's a huge change, man. But what exactly does that mean for us? Do you want to just ditch everything?" Jake confronted the bitterness brewing in his belly. "No, I'm not ditching you, but I want to pull away from the toxic stuff. We can do better. I can do better." As he spoke those words, he detected something shifting within his friends. Mia glanced at Tom, a silent conversation passing between them like an unspoken agreement. "Okay then," Tom said, crossing his arms. "Let's see if you can hold on to that. Words are just words until you prove something different." A wave of frustration surged through Jake, clashing with the urge to validate his intentions. "I get it. You think it's easy to change. It's not just about words. I have to fight to mean what I say." Their expressions softened as the tentative acknowledgement grew into a challenge. "Show us then," Mia stated firmly, a face of cautious optimism, "and we'll be here to support you." The conversation left Jake with a new tension. The challenge of transformation was not a solitary journey anymore. The path forward was still shrouded in uncertainty, yet a flicker of hope emerged amid the insecurities that tugged at him. For the first time, he felt an inkling of possibility that change could be real, tangible, and rewarding. But as he stepped outside into the sprawling expanse of the schoolyard, the reality escalated into raw anticipation. Faces from the past, those who had witnessed his transgressions, lingered like shadows on the horizon. Could he face them, knowing he no longer wore his old shield of mockery? What would happen when confronted by those he had once bullied, those whose pain he had never acknowledged? Jake took a deep breath, preparing himself. This was not merely a crossroads, it was a full-fledged crossroads, laden with the weight of recalibrated relationships and a quest for redemption. He understood now that resilience would have to become his foundation, especially in the face of unexpected backlash. The stakes were rising, and the next encounter would demand not just courage, but a steadfast commitment to his transformation. Would he rise to the occasion, or succumb again to the past? The next chapter of his story was poised to unfold, as the distance to his reckoning with those he had wronged loomed ever closer. A chill ran down Jake's spine as he stepped into the unforgiving light of the schoolyard. The air was thick, almost oppressive, as it filled with whispers and laughter that felt like daggers aimed at his heart. He could see them, the faces of those he had wronged, each one a reminder of his past mistakes. They were standing in groups, heads bent close together, their laughter harmonizing with the distant memory of his own. He had half a mind to turn around, retreating into the familiarity of his old self, where he could shield himself behind a facade of indifference. But something inside him resisted that impulse. The weight of his earlier resolve settled heavily in his chest. Change couldn't wait for the perfect moment. As he strolled deeper into the yard, he spotted David, a former target of his bullying. David sat on a bench, isolated from the crowd, tapping furiously on his phone. Jake's heart pounded in a rhythm of fear and anticipation. Should he approach? Could he even say anything meaningful? A fleeting thought crossed his mind. What if he just walked past? That would be easier, but that impulse was drowned out by a louder voice, the one that urged him to confront his past, to seek out the very people who had endured his cruelty. Then instinct kicked in. He took slow steps toward David, each stride imbued with the gravity of his choices. The buzzing crowd faded into a distant hum. It was just him and David now. As the distance closed, he felt his pulse quicken in tandem with his resolve. "David!" Jake called out, the sound of his own voice both foreign and familiar. The boy looked up, surprise plastered across his face. He was still, a deer caught in headlights. "What do you want, Jake?" David's tone was clipped, his body tense. In that moment, Jake felt the enormity of what lay ahead wash over him. This was more than an apology. It was an opportunity to dismantle the very things that had defined him. I came to apologize," he stammered, an insistent breath pushing the words out. "What I did to you back then was wrong. I didn't think about the pain I caused. I just want you to know that I'm really sorry." Silence engulfed the space between them, brimming with the weight of unspoken feelings. Jake braced himself for David's outrage, the righteous anger that might spill forth. But instead, David remained quiet. Pain flickered in his eyes, raw and unfiltered. Anger surged within Jake, an uninvited response to David's silence. "I know it doesn't mean anything coming from me," he continued, "but I want to be someone different now. I'm trying to change." David finally spoke, his voice low. "You think saying sorry makes it all okay?" Jake's heart sank, each word feeling like a stone tossed into a deep well. "No, I don't. I know it won't wipe away the hurt, but I need to try," he replied, voice steady, battling the instinct to retreat back into old patterns. "You've always been good at making people feel small, Jake," David said, looking straight at him. "What makes you think you can just flip a switch and be better?" In that moment, Jake faced a mirror reflecting his insecurities and the lifelong habit of dismissing others. "Because I can't sit with myself knowing I hurt you," Jake countered, searching for a glimpse of connection amid the ruin he had created. "I need to do better, for me and for you." As the weight of his words lingered in the air, he noticed David's expression shift, uncertainty battling with the hurt from their past. For every sneered insult Jake had uttered, this moment of honesty carried its own power. But just as tentative hope flickered within Jake, a laugh erupted behind him, pulling his attention back to the crowd. A group of classmates had gathered, clearly eavesdropping, their eyes wide with surprise at the unfolding scene. That laugh hammered Jake's chest, igniting old anxieties that threatened to derail his progress. "Look! It's the bully trying to be nice!" someone shouted, sending ripples of predictable mockery through the crowd. Jake's resolve wavered, fear creeping back in. He had taken a step toward accountability, yet the shadows of his past loomed large. He stole a glance at David, unsure if he had made the right choice. Now he stood in a minefield of emotions, caught between the past he had fought to escape and a possible future he was just beginning to grasp. Would he falter as he had before, or summon the courage to remain standing? A heavy decision waited at the edge of his consciousness. But more than that, Jake pondered what he might discover about himself in this tumultuous moment, knowing every choice from here could rewrite his narrative. Would he embrace the challenge and push through the second-guessing? The confrontation felt irrevocably charged, ready to explode into a lesson on vulnerability and strength. What lay ahead remained murky, but Jake's heart raced with a mix of trepidation and eager anticipation as he prepared to face both David and himself. This time the stakes weren't merely about reputations, they were about redemption and revelation. As whispers cascaded around him, Jake felt the crossroads draw near, beckoning him to commit. Would he rise to this defining moment, or risk being swallowed by the judgment of those watching? The answer could shape everything that came next. Jake felt every heartbeat reverberate through his limbs as the laughter of his classmates echoed in the distance. He had stood at the precipice of change, yet as they jeered, holding tightly to their ideas of who he was, terror curled around his throat like a noose. David's silence felt insurmountable, punctuated by the dismissive guffaws of their peers. What was the point of his apology if it were met only with sarcastic disdain? A wave of self-doubt crested within him, whispering that repentance was a futile exercise. But instinctively, he remembered the sheer desperation that lingered in David's eyes moments ago. It bolstered his resolve, urging him to push through the torrents of mockery. "I'm sorry," Jake repeated, his voice now steadier, tinged with unmistakable urgency. "I know it sounds shallow, but that's not all I want to say. I want to do better. I want to learn how to be a decent person." The laughter dampened, intrigue overpowering indifference, as heads turned toward him, new flickers of emotion emerging in the air. Jake could almost feel the collective breath of the crowd as they shifted, tempered by curiosity. They waited to see what David would do next. David looked at Jake, trapped in a moment suspended between past grievances and an uncertain future. "What does that even mean?" he asked, his voice still strained but now laced with a hesitant curiosity. "How do you plan to change after everything?" Jake paused, grappling with a thought that seemed elusive until now. "I've started volunteering, working with kids who need support. I realized I'm good at helping, not hurting. I want to be someone they can count on, not fear." The mention of his efforts pierced the tension like an arrow, leaving room for more contemplation. The familiar impulse to snarl or recoil from this confrontation fought hard within him. "You're vulnerable. They'll mock you even more." But this time, he let the instinct slide aside, buoyed by an unfamiliar strength. I can't sit back anymore. I can't let fear dictate who I am," he continued, now conjoined with vulnerability rather than anger. His audience spun into a whirlpool of murmurs, a mosaic of mixed emotions flitting across faces. "Why should I believe you?" David shot back, though the sting seemed less fierce this time. He leaned slightly forward, edging closer to the simmering tension that brimmed between them. "Because I don't just want to apologize. I want to put in the work. It's not easy, but I'm trying to understand why I became who I was. If I did that to you, then I need to face it." David continued to search Jake's face, and Jake gauged the distance between past wrongs and the present moment. He felt the cornerstones of his identity shifting beneath him. No longer shackled by mere judgments, he stood as a product of his choices, already painstakingly reconsidering the fabric of his existence. As the murmurs quieted, Jake seized the moment, feeling the weight lift slightly off his shoulders. "I can't change the past, I know that, but I can choose how I act moving forward. I can be a better person, in the smallest and grandest ways. The crowd seemed to soften around him. He could see a collective shift from mockery to apprehension, and for the first time he sensed that something monumental pulsed at the edge of their perception. But then the laughter broke out again, sharper this time. A boy from the back chimed in, "Yeah, right. You think you can change? You can't even keep your mouth shut when it counts." With a flare of old resentment, Jake felt the urge to lash out. The instinctive nature in him riled, but he quelled it down, remembering the direction he wished to go. Rather than retaliate, he focused on David's face, a tapestry of resilience against a history carved in pain. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," Jake pressed, locking eyes with David's. "I just want you to see that I'm trying to confront my demons, not bury them. I hope one day I can earn that chance." The finality in his tone echoed in the charged space between them. A fragile thread of anticipation shimmered in the air, igniting a flicker of connection. Would David accept this proclamation as a step forward, or would he remain unconvinced, tethered to their shared history? Jake felt ensnared at another crossroads. Perhaps this was not solely about redemption. It was also about acceptance, a deeper journey yet to unfold. Suddenly burdened with clarity, Jake realized he had stepped out of himself, birthing a version of him capable of facing this turbulence. But with the tension still hanging, unresolved and silent, he understood an important truth would still await him. What awaited Jake in the unexpectedly harsh light of possible acceptance, and would he have the courage to navigate the uncharted waters of transformation? All eyes lingered on the two of them, marking the stage for whatever would come next. Jake's heart raced, not just from the tension in the air, but from the weight of his own words. He had pulled back a curtain on himself, revealing vulnerabilities he often concealed behind bravado. As he searched David's expression, he sensed a shift, a glimmer of something he had not anticipated, understanding. David's gaze softened, the sharp edges of resentment beginning to dull. "Look," he said slowly, still cautious. "This is a lot for us to unpack. You hurt a lot of people, Jake." "I know," Jake replied, the sincerity in his voice palpable, "and I'm not here to make excuses. I just want to prove that I can do better." He felt a flicker of confidence. The crowd had quieted, their laughter ebbing as curiosity replaced malice. It dawned on him that perhaps he could forge a new identity, one that aligned not with the bully he once was, but with a person committed to growth. As the bell rang, cutting through the charged atmosphere, Jake took a step forward. "I know it's going to take time," he admitted. "It won't happen overnight, but I'm willing to take any step necessary to make amends, even if it means facing you all again." The murmurs transformed into a contemplative hush, each classmate weighing his words against their recollections of the past. For so long, Jake had been the protagonist in a story of arrogance, but now he was crafting something new, an emerging narrative of personal accountability. "Maybe we should see what you can do," David offered tentatively, a challenge more than an acceptance. "But it'll take more than words. You have to show us." Jake nodded, recognizing that a path was being laid before him. The challenge echoed in his mind. He had been reckless before, but now the stakes were different. It wasn't about proving himself to others. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of growth. He retreated from the group, the lingering gazes weighing heavily on him. As he walked through the familiar hallways of the school, the faces of his classmates painting a picture of his previous self, confident, reckless, lost. But he was not that person anymore. Or at least, he didn't want to be. With the day's events replaying in his mind, he found himself in front of a mirror in the boys' restroom, scarcely recognizing the reflection staring back. The hopeful determination in his eyes mixed with residual uncertainty. Who would he become? Could he actually change? It was then that a plan sparked in him. Rather than attempting to show his worth through grand gestures, Jake decided on tangible steps, perhaps starting with the kids he'd been volunteering with. They were the foundation upon which to reshape his identity. He could experiment with patience, compassion, and accountability, qualities he had taken for granted. As he contemplated his next move, an image of the children surfaced. Their laughter, energy, and eagerness pulled a smile from him, a reminder of purpose. That was it. He would focus on these small actions as building blocks to the new version of Jake. But even as determination wrapped around him, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. What if the shadows of his past re-emerged, prepared to sabotage his transformation? What if facing his old self was the most challenging part of this journey? Just as he was about to let that thought seep into his resolve, he remembered David's skeptical smile and the murmurs of the onlookers, reminders of the past he could not ignore. With a firm breath, Jake straightened his shoulders, committed to forging ahead, although soaking in the weight of uncertainty. The path to redemption and acceptance was fraught with challenges, but he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. It dawned on him that he could no longer ignore the monsters lurking in the shadows. The moment had come to confront them head-on, to battle not just for redemption, but for the freedom to redefine who he was and who he might become. And as the urgency of this moment settled in deeper, he realized that change begins at the edge of discomfort. Would he have the strength to face those shadows, or would the allure of his past tempt him back into familiar darkness? Jake awoke the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose pulsating in his chest. He had a plan, a series of steps, designed not just to impress others, but to genuinely transform himself. The sun filtered through his window, illuminating the remnants of doubt still clinging to the edges of his mind. Yet for the first time, he felt willing to confront those shadows head-on. He decided to visit the center where he volunteered, eager to embrace the opportunity to connect with the children. They were his fresh canvas, a tangible way to manifest the changes he wished to embody. As he dressed, his inner dialogue circled around expectations and accountability. He could present himself as a new person, but he knew authenticity would demand more than surface-level change. Arriving at the center, Jake was met with laughter and energy, the kind that filled the room with a contagious vitality. He took a moment to let the sounds wash over him, a stark contrast to the judgments he anticipated facing at school. Kneeling down, he greeted the children with genuine warmth. Their innocent enthusiasm reminded him of his own forgotten joy. "Ready for another adventure today, guys?" he asked, a grin breaking across his face. "Yeah!" they shouted, their faces brightening. Jake formed a plan to lead an art project. He would encourage them to express their feelings through creativity, a concept he wrestled with himself. As they began sketching and painting, he found himself moving from child to child, guiding them as they poured their emotions onto paper. With each enthusiastic interaction, the weight of his past began to feel more manageable, more like a part of his journey rather than an insurmountable obstacle. However, halfway through the class, an unexpected challenge emerged. One of the kids, Samuel, struggled with frustration over a drawing that wasn't turning out as he envisioned. Watching the boy's face crumple, Jake felt the pull of his old nature. A voice whispering to dismiss the moment, to shrug it off, to step back into the shadows where discomfort thrived. But another part of him, the part he was trying to build, pushed him forward. "Hey, Samuel," he said, kneeling beside him, "why don't you tell me about what you're trying to create?" Samuel looked up, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "I just can't make it look right," he said quietly. Jake recalled his own battles with perfectionism and the paralyzing pressure of failure. "You know," he began, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes our first attempts aren't how we hoped they would be, but that's okay. You can always try again." The scene felt foreign, both comforting and challenging. Was he genuinely practicing what he preached, or merely putting on a show? As Samuel nodded, Jake saw a transformation take place. Not just in the boy, but within himself as well. He was learning to embrace vulnerability, not just in others, but in his own journey. It wasn't enough to merely want to change. He had to accept that failure could be a stepping stone. When the session concluded, rather than rushing off, Jake lingered, sharing the children's artwork with their parents as they arrived. Their pride lit up the room, and he felt a sense of belonging swell within him. As he drove home, he pondered the small successes of the day. Each interaction had carved away at the darkness he feared, yet beneath the surface, doubts stirred. Had he genuinely made a difference, or was it just temporary? The uncomfortable thought haunted him. In his quest to rebuild himself, would the remnants of his past still cling to him like shadows? There was a deeper confrontation awaiting, one that beckoned him to delve into his own fears. Jake's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, a message from David popping up. "Now that you've gotten started, are you ready for the real test?" His heart raced again, not from nerves, but from the thrill of commitment. What was David's challenge? Would it call for true confrontation, or would it merely peel back layers he wasn't ready to face? He understood that the next step would define him further. The opportunity for meaningful growth loomed ahead, but he questioned whether he could face it with strength. Would he rise to the challenge, or would the echoes of his past whisper enough to draw him back into the shadows? Jake arrived at school the next day, anxiety swirling within him as he crossed the threshold. The familiar hallways, once suffocating, now seemed like a stage on which he would confront his insecurities. His resolve was firm, yet the spectre of ridicule loomed nearby, a constant reminder of his past entanglements. He spotted David waiting by their usual spot, leaning nonchalantly against the wall. As Jake approached, David's expression softened, his usual bravado replaced with a subtle seriousness. "You ready?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. "For what?" Jake feigned ignorance, masking the flutter of anticipation in his belly. "The real test. You can't just step into the light. You have to confront darkness too." With those words, David walked away, leaving Jake standing there, contemplating the weight of what had just been uttered. Shaking off the heaviness, Jake headed to his first class, pushing thoughts of David to the back of his mind. During a discussion on conflict resolution, a flicker of inspiration ignited within him. He realized he had the opportunity to share his experience, the struggle that had once defined him. The notion sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. What if he turned his vulnerability into strength? As the class discussion evolved, Jake seized his moment. "I think everyone feels pressure to be perfect, and when they don't measure up, it hurts. I used to hide behind jokes and sarcasm because I was afraid of failing." The silence that followed was thick. Jake's heart raced. Had he gone too far? "Jake, that's really honest. What did you do to change?" a classmate asked, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. That question hung in the air, giving Jake a strange sense of confidence. "I started volunteering. It felt different, seeing kids struggle with their own creative processes. It taught me that mistakes are part of learning." For the first time, Jake felt empowered. Sharing his truth was terrifying but invigorating, unraveling layers of self-doubt with each spoken word. The class murmured in understanding. Their eyes, previously judgmental, now shone with respect. As he walked to lunch afterward, Jake replayed the moment in his mind. It wasn't just about revealing his past, it was about stepping into who he wanted to become. Yet residual fears tugged at him, reminding him that not everyone would embrace this new version of him, especially not those anchored in the past. Near the cafeteria, he felt a shove, a sudden impact that sent his heart into a tailspin. Turning around, he came face to face with Marcus, the school bully and one of his sharpest tormentors. Panic surged within him, memories of mockery flooding his mind. Marcus was different today, though. not the confrontational bully Jake had feared. Instead, there was an unusual seriousness in his eyes. "I heard what you said in class," he stated, the tone lacking malice. "Why do you care so much about those kids?" Caught off guard, Jake hesitated. "Because they matter. Everyone's story does." Marcus studied him, and in that intense silence, Jake realized they were at a pivotal juncture. Would he allow this moment to spiral back into old fears, or face it head-on? "I used to feel the same way," Marcus revealed, his voice softer. "But I thought it was easier to just make everyone laugh at someone else's expense." A flicker of understanding passed between them, a shared recognition of pain. Jake felt a strange sense of empathy for the boy who had bullied him for so long, but he also felt a rush of indignation. This was not just about understanding, it was about choosing a different path. "Maybe you don't have to anymore," Jake suggested quietly, testing the waters. Marcus shifted uneasily, the mask of toughness slipping just a fraction. The moment hung thickly between them, and Jake suddenly recognized the opportunity for transformation, both for himself and possibly for Marcus. The bell rang, and the spell broke. In that brief interaction, Jake found himself on a precipice. Would he cling to the idea that change was impossible for people like Marcus, or could this be a chance to extend understanding? With clashing emotions, Jake realized he was faced with a decision that would impact not only Marcus, but his own evolution. Could he embrace empathy while still guarding himself against past pain? As he walked away, Jake's thoughts wrestled with the multifaceted reality of human experience. The challenge David had alluded to was unfolding before him, a crossroads that required strength and introspection. What would he choose? The weight of this confrontation settled heavily on his shoulders as he headed into the next class, leaving Jake questioning how far he was willing to extend his newly discovered courage, and whether he could truly inspire change in others while weathering the storm of his own past. Then his phone buzzed again, this time a new message from David. "Are you truly ready for what comes next?" The implications shimmered with uncertainty, as Jake's journey into deeper personal growth hung tantalizingly in the balance. The days passed, and with each sunrise, Jake felt an undeniable shift within himself. Gone were his patterns of mockery, replaced instead by a resolute commitment to live authentically. Every interaction, small gestures, shared laughter and fresh conversations contributed to his metamorphosis, yet the lingering specter of his past lurked just beyond his vision. As he settled into his routine of volunteering, Jake grew more adept at fostering connections with the kids. The weight he had carried for so long felt lighter as he transitioned from the boy who bullied to the young man determined to uplift. He forged bonds with each child who brightened at his presence, and in return, the echoes of his former self began to fade. But the true test loomed nearer. David's words, a haunting invitation to dive deeper into the challenge of change, resonated in the corridors of his mind. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Those words lingered like an embers waiting to ignite. One afternoon, the school held an assembly to discuss bullying and its repercussions. Students filed into the auditorium, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. As he took his seat, Jake couldn't shake the weight of potential confrontation. This was it. The principal gave a compelling speech on the importance of empathy and respect, leading to a discussion panel that included junior students sharing their experiences. Jake's thoughts cycled back to Marcus, the confrontation they had shared, and how change was desperately needed but far from easy, especially among the legacy of bullying that had woven itself tightly into the fabric of their school culture. When Marcus was called to speak, Jake felt a nervous flutter in his stomach. Would he embrace this moment? Would the past resurface? As Marcus took the stage, Jake's breath hitched, a mix of fear and hope. Marcus cleared his throat, and for the first time, The audience was met not with bravado, but with vulnerability. "I'm here today because I've had my eyes opened," he began. "I was wrong. I bullied people to make myself feel better, but I lost sight of what really mattered. I want to do better too." The auditorium fell silent, his words weaving their own kind of magic, allowing glimmers of collective realization to emerge. It was not just Marcus's confession that spoke volumes, but also the unexpected bond between the two boys, a symbol of change unfolding before everyone's eyes. Jake felt a subtle nudge, a surge within him to join Marcus on that stage. After all, he had also walked a similar path. The comfortable seat box he had been occupying felt too restrictive, suffocating him as urgency bubbled beneath the surface. Before he could second-guess himself, he shot up from his seat and navigated through the audience, each step filled with conviction. "Can I say something?" Jake asked, finding himself before the podium where Marcus stood. The gasps from the crowd fueled his resolve. "Jake." Marcus looked at him, bewilderment crossing his features. But there was also an air of camaraderie, an acknowledgement of shared battles. "Yeah, I just wanted to say that change starts with honesty. I was the bully. I'll always be part of that history, but I refuse to remain shackled to my past. Like Marcus, I've decided to stop hiding behind ignorance. Everyone deserves compassion. We can all grow, and I am willing to fight for that." The auditorium erupted into a wave of murmurs as Jake's realization took root. This was not merely a moment of redemption for himself, but a pivotal illustration that change could ripple outward, initiating a cycle of empathy throughout the school. As he scanned the audience, he saw a variety of expressions: surprise, admiration, and even skepticism, but he pushed through, fueled by the possible transformation happening in this very instant. "I want to lead, not through mockery, but through integrity and collaboration. I want to repair what I've torn down." At that moment, Jake felt weightless, as though each word carried no burden, but rather built bridges instead. Empowerment flooded his veins, transcending the fear he had once clung to. He chose acknowledgement over denial, acknowledging his past and propelling himself into a future ripe with potential. The applause surged in waves, washing over him like a cleansing tide. For the first time in years, he stood not just as Jake, the formerly feared bully, but as Jake, the emblem of resilience and possibility. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Jake committed to various initiatives, advocating for active empathy within the school, organizing respect campaigns, and creating platforms for dialogue about bullying. His focus shifted, not merely on his personal growth, but also on fostering a culture that intertwined understanding and kindness, setting the stage for collective healing. Jake caught sight of his reflection in the glass of a nearby window, and although the boy he once was could still be felt, the boy peering back was unrecognizable in the best of ways, a true testament to the power of self-reflection and accountability. And while shadows would still linger, he welcomed them as reminders of how far he had journeyed. His rise from bullying to building was not just about personal achievement, but about extending acceptance to others and instilling the belief that change begins with self. Now, standing on the precipice of transformation, he realized he had seized the moment. A pivotal question lay before him: how far could this journey take him? In gaining this clarity, Jake embraced the truth that his story was no longer defined by a single act, but woven into a vibrant tapestry of growth, discovery, and hope. It was a new chapter. He was ready for whatever came next. Jake turned to the audience, exhilaration coursing through him. He wasn't done yet. You need to subscribe now to our channel so you don't miss our next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to fuel the algorithm. Trust me, it makes a monumental difference. Tell us in the comments about your reactions and theories regarding this transformative journey. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion.